Good morning, everyone. My name is Yaron, and I'm going to present to you today the Agriculture Resilience Act of 2023. This bill asks us to rethink the harmful way we practice agriculture today and introduce us to the climate solution that's right under our feet. First, I would like to thank our great team, the manager Belen, her deputy Kelsey, Kate, Emma, Fiona, Fritz, Oliver, Ini, Yu, Shuen, and our committed faculty advisor, Matthew Palmer. Let's start by getting to know Ray Gazer. Ray is 70 years old, is a farmer from Iowa that grows mostly corn and soybeans. Ray was born into agriculture, managing his family farm since the age of 15. He's also a Republican and not a big believer in climate change. But in the last decade, he knows that something has changed. The amount of extreme rain events have increased, and he can't forget that day in September of 2019 when 4 inches of rain washed off his crops worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in just 1 hour. Ray is not the only one feeling the change. More than 85% of Iowa's land is farms dealing with the change in climate, knowing the worst is yet to come. By 2050, floods are expected to increase by 20%, temperatures by 7 degrees Fahrenheit, and corn yields will decrease by 25%. Unfortunately, Ray and his fellow farmers are making the problem worse when agriculture in Iowa is responsible for 38% of the state's greenhouse gas emissions. This is the reality everywhere in the US today. Agriculture is the main victim of climate change, but is also a major contributor. In fact, agriculture is responsible for 11% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the US, the 5th most polluting industry, completely out of proportion with the size of the agriculture industry, less than 1% of the GDP. In these two NASA simulations, we can clearly see the challenges that agriculture will face due to these emissions. By the middle of the century, farmers will experience 27 to 50 days of over 95 degrees Fahrenheit each year, 2.5 times the average number we've seen over the last 30 years. Flash droughts risk over cropland is expected to increase from 32% today to 49% by the end of the century. Heavy rains that currently occur once every 20 years will occur every 5 years. Northern areas are projected to become wetter, while southern areas are projected to become drier. These changes will also result in decreasing soil moisture, creating soil that can grow less food and store less carbon. How much less? After 2050, soybean yields are expected to decline by 9% and corn yields by 7% on average around the US. But if we zoom in and we look at the most productive areas of agriculture, like the Corn Belt, we will experience more severe damage, up to 20% crop decline. What are we doing wrong? Until not too long ago, industrial agriculture seemed like the solution for the fast-growing world. Since the 60s, agriculture production has more than tripled, reducing hunger rates. But we achieved this growth by using unsustainable agricultural practices, putting short-term economic gain over long-term prosperity. Today, the gains are shrinking, and science warns us. We could run out of topsoil in 60 years if we won't change our ways. One of these unsustainable practices is overgrazing. Overgrazing allows too many livestock to graze on soil that can't recover its vegetation, creating higher erosion rates. Another harmful practice is chemical fertilizers. Farmers use them to boost crop growth, but excessive use causes water pollution, nutrient loss, and increase in greenhouse gas emissions. A third unsustainable practice is soil compaction, caused by heavy agricultural machinery, resulting in limited root growth and poor water absorption. All of these practices together, including over-tilling, which we'll get to in a moment, lead to a dangerous loss of organic matter, which makes our soil a significant carbon sink. Soil is actually the second biggest carbon sink on the planet after the ocean, holding about 3 times more carbon than the atmosphere. But since the Industrial Revolution, the rate of carbon loss from soil has increased dramatically. After getting to know the problems, let's move to the optimistic side, the solutions. The Agriculture Resilience Act was introduced last March by Representative Shelley Pingree, a Democrat from Maine, and as you can see, an organic farmer herself. The bill is an ambitious attempt to tackle both problems, climate change and food insecurity, with the same set of solutions. The bill has a few main goals. The first is to reduce agriculture greenhouse gas emissions by half by 2030 and net zero by 2040. The second is to draw down massive amounts of carbon from the atmosphere and store them in the soil, increasing storage by 0.5% each year. The third is to develop agricultural systems that are more resilient to extreme climate. How are we going to do that? There is a wide variety of solutions that this bill offers, like tripling on-farm renewable energy, reducing food waste by 75%, but we will focus on two main solutions, one specifically related to soil health and the other specifically related to livestock. The first example of soil health practice this bill encourages is no-till farming, which means planting crops without disturbing the soil. While tilling, the top layer of the soil is turned over, which helps to prepare the soil for fertilizers before seeding. But in the long run, tilling creates soil erosion, removes organic matter, and releases carbon into the atmosphere. By no-tilling, the soil structures stay intact and crop residue is left, protecting the soil surface. No-tilling saves the farmer time and money and can increase productivity by 58%. And yet, only 21% of US farmers have adopted it. Why? The main answer is the switch to no-tilling costs money. It's a long-term investment. The second example is cover crops. Cover crops are plants grown primarily to benefit other crops. They planted between main crop seasons when the soil is usually bare and serve as a buffer, protecting the soil from rain and wind and reducing soil erosion. The roots of the cover crops improve and enrich the soil structure, holding nitrogen in the soil, limiting greenhouse gas emission and reducing the need for chemical fertilizers. Farmers who use cover crops experience a yearly increase of 3 to 4% in their yield. Next, we're moving to the pasture-based solutions. Today, 95% of US cattle ends up in feedlots. The limitation of confined feeding, without even mentioning the horrific living conditions, are clear. It makes it easier for disease to spread, both between cattle and humans. The amount of manure in one single place leads to a massive land and water pollution. But farmers practice it because it's efficient, because it's productive in the short term. This bill aims to turn 50% of grazing land to rotational grazing by the end of 2030 and 100% by the end of 2040. In rotational grazing, a large field is divided up into small areas, and the livestock are moved from one area to another. This movement allows the grazed areas to rest and regrow, increase soil organic matter, increase water absorption, reduce runoff, and reduce the need of synthetic fertilizers. The main disadvantage is the cost of building fences and the time required to move the livestock. Like the cover crops and the no-tilling, it requires a long-term investment. And this is where the bill steps in incentivizing farmers to adopt these solutions. Today, farmers get paid back from their crop insurance for the amount of crop they lost, which encourages them to grow as much as they can using unhealthy practices. This bill offers reduced premiums on crop insurance that could decrease farmers' payments up to $500,000 every 5 years if they implement sustainable soil health practices like cover crops, no-tilling, or rotational grazing. A farmer doesn't have to use all suggested practices in this bill, but the more things they do, the more reduction they'll get. The second incentive is grants for states and tribal governments to create soil conservation plans. That relieves the local government from the economic burden by providing federal money to support agriculture. Remember Ray? Whether or not he believes in climate change, and even without the rewards from the bill, he changed his farming practices, trying to adapt to Iowa's changing climate. Today, his farm is 65% cover crops, 100% no-till, and it is totally fertilized by livestock manure. He recently said that when the Iowa winds blow, the topsoil of his fields remains in place. When the spring rains come, his soil absorbs the water better. In his words, farmers want to improve their carbon print, but many do not because they can't see the return on their investment. He hopes that with the right incentives, more farmers will join him. Thank you so much. We'll take questions now.
Yeah, I'm curious. So you mentioned sort of like the grazing methodology or mechanisms and all of like the livestock industry, and I'm wondering if the bill focuses on the demand side of reducing sort of livestock or meat consumption within that industry, because most of the soy, corn grown in the U.S. ends up going to feed livestock, and it would be a lot more, I guess, like effective to just reduce the amount of land used for that and to dedicate it towards more, a wider variety of crops and more like sustainable method of growing those crops with more land. Like, have you looked into that, or does the bill focus on that aspect at all?
Can you rephrase it? I'm not sure if I got the question.
Yeah. Like, does the bill address sort of the demand side of how much meat basically goes into the U.S. consumption?
We didn't got too deep in that field.
Okay.
Great presentation. Thank you so much. I was wondering, you were mentioning a financial incentive in forms of grants and insurance, and I'm just wondering, with the current climate crisis, does the government offer any sense of security, like financial security to agriculture?
I mean, yeah, we can say like the crop insurance now is paid by taxes of American people. Like just in the last 25 years, I've seen an article that the crop insurance for crop failures was $150 billion, and that this amount have increased. Like only the payments for drought has increased by 400%, and that the payments for floods have increased in 300%. So we can say we're all paying on this right now, and this bill will just take the money and try to incentivize farmers to not create the problems we're paying for. Thank you, Rolly.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Shubi. Thank you for the presentation. I really like the example of Ray, and I wanted to know if Ray's experience is an isolated case, or is it indicative of a broader trend within the agriculture industry, and how is the bill addressing the reception of its implementation in the farmers?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Ray is presenting a wider belief of farmers, which is interesting because farmers are on the front lines of climate change. But I've seen data about farmers in Iowa that 10 years ago, only 60% of them believed that climate change exists. And in a survey that was made 2 years ago, 80% said they believe in climate change. So I think their beliefs are changing, and it is important to get bills like that done, or for farmers to change their ways, because they need to acknowledge the problem to solve it. Thank you, Clarissa.
Thank you.